Okay, so we are live, everyone. It's 11 o'clock here in San Francisco, which means that Wine Fair 2021 Bottles Without Borders is officially beginning. I never thought this day would come, and I'm extremely happy that it has. I'm Pamela Bush, the founder of Wine Fair and the Vineyard, and we have an extremely full weekend. So, depending on your interest in wine and natural wine, there's going to be a lot for everyone who is listening right now. Our first panel is how to start a natural winery, that is. And we have a really great panelists. A couple of them are just signing on right now. We're working that out on our end. In the meantime, though, I do want to introduce our moderator, Icy Liu. Icy has Ungrafted podcast, and she is joining us from Taipei. And thank you so much, Icy, for being up in the middle of the night and doing this for everyone. So I'm gonna let you take it away.
Thank you, Pamela. I'm so excited to start off this year's fair with our incredible panel. Our topic today is starting and running a natural winery. Before we start with introducing the panelists, I would like to first thank our incredible sponsor, Two Shepherds. They are a California winery started in 2010 by William Allen and Karen Danon. They make minimal intervention wine, primarily focused on Rhone-style varietals. And today I want to start off with a quick intro of our panelists. We have Jill Mathiasen from Mathiasen Vineyards in California, Nicoletta Dicova from Culture Winery called San Dotano in Balearia in Tuscany, Tracy Brannett from Donkey and Goat in California, and Brianne Day from Day Wines in Oregon. So maybe we could start off, Jill, with a quick intro about, how long you've been in business, how you got to where your background, and whether you're a negociant, what kind of wines you make, annual production, etc. Jill, I think you're on mute. So I'm going to try to unmute you.
Okay. I unmuted. All right. Hi, everybody. It's kind of funny because I guess you can see me, but I can't see you. But at least I can see these other lovely ladies who are in our little group of presenters. So good morning. It's sort of morning here still. We started, my husband and I started Mathiasen in 2003. We started as a negociant, so we were buying grapes. But Steve, my husband, is a viticultural consultant, so we were buying grapes from vineyards that he was consulting on. Over the years, we've been able to lease vineyards and farm them ourselves. And so we consider those estate. And then I was just muted, so I don't know if what happened there. But anyway, I was saying over the few years, we purchased a couple of vineyards, and one of the vineyards also included a winery. We make wines from a lot of different varieties. The ones that we grow ourselves include Cabernet, Chardonnay, Ribolla Gialla. Wait, I keep getting this message and I keep getting muted. Is that happening, Icy? Do you know? Are you hitting the mute? Because I keep getting this pop-up that I've been muted.
I'm trying to unmute you from, yourself?
I'm unmuted, but then every so often it pops up that I've been muted.
Oh, okay. Everyone can hear her, so sorry.
Okay. So anyway, I was saying we grow grapes that include Chardonnay, Cabernet, Refosco, Ribolla Gialla, Schioppettino, Cabernet Franc, a little bit of Sagrantino, some Petit Verdot, Merlot, and then we buy grapes in smaller quantities for some of our special wine club wines, and those include everything from Lagrigne, Pinot Meunier, Pinot Gris, what else? Grenache Blanc, Pinot Blanc, Zinfandel, a whole range of kind of small production, more unusual varieties that we get to buy and make wine out of whenever we can. What was I going to say? Oh, and also we have fruit orchards, and we grow fruit and sell at the farmers market and to local restaurants, mostly stone fruit, peaches, plums, nectarines, pluots. And in COVID times, we did a crazy thing since restaurants were closed, and used our peaches and co-fermented them with some of our Chardonnay and did a peach and grape wine. So that was a really fun thing. Let's see what else. We make about 10,000 cases a year. We sell all around the country and actually all over the world. Restaurants, wine shops, boutique wine shops, and we have a very small tasting room here in Napa where we're located. And we have about 12 year-round employees now between our cellar, our vineyards, and our hospitality.
Oh, Jill, I wanted to ask you one question, and the other fellow panelists I forgot to ask is, what is one thing you wish you had known when you started your own wine?
Great. Yeah. Okay. So one thing that I wished I'd known, but I'm glad that I didn't in a way, was how hard this whole business really is. Because if I had really known, I don't think I ever would have started. So it's kind of good that I didn't know, or else I would never have started. But then the other thing that I really didn't expect to need to know, and I wish I had, was I started, my background is in technology. I worked in the nonprofit world for a long time. So and now I'm running a business, a small family business. And I wish I'd known more about running a business. I wish I knew how to read a P&L. I wish I knew how to read a balance sheet. Yeah,
that's it's like running a small business, so we forget about that sometimes.
it's a lot about running a small business. Yeah.
Yeah, let's move on to Nicoletta. Could you also tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Of course, with pleasure. I'm really happy to represent Europe in this. Does it work well, the audio? Do you hear me well? You hear me well?
I can hear you. And then maybe the other panelists,
So,
while we're speaking, maybe put on
wonderful. Mute. Yes, I'm part of actually two small artisan projects. Together with my partner in 2018, we started San Donato in Bellaria in Tuscany. We are based in Chianti after completing our core PDC, permaculture design. So also in the vineyard, we applied the process of permaculture design, and for example, together with the vines, we have planted also orchards, mixing them with the vines in order to obtain synergies between the plants, as well as some medical plants and herbs like lavender, like sage, like rosemary. And this was part of our idea in this vineyard. It's a really tiny project. We have less than 1 hectare. We still will keep on planting. So that's part of the vineyards, because all terraced this autumn, 1 hectare. So it will be really a tiny, a very small production, which we will be able to manage by ourselves, which was our goal. We really wanted to keep it really small. The varieties we have chosen are, of course, Sangiovese, which is, as you all know, the leading variety here in Tuscany for the reds. And also the area is really very suitable for this variety. It's a schist terroir in quite high altitude for Tuscany. And we have also planted some white varieties. It's mainly Vermentino and the rare varieties from northern Italy called Dorella to make sparkling. This is for personal pleasure. We really love sparkling wines. And I'm also part of a very tiny project in Bulgaria, which is my homeland. It's called Melnikon and is situated in the southern part of the country, close to the historical town of Melnik, where we work with two very ancient indigenous varieties, which exist since more than 2,000 years, back to the time of the Thracians. They are called Shiroka Melnik and Kiratsuda. And again, the tiny, we make less than 5,000 years bottles per year, while here in San Donato we still have production. We started in 2018 planting, so we are waiting for our first harvest. And I'm really glad to take part in this panel and to represent Europe with you beautiful ladies.
Yeah, that's great. We are very excited to have you too. And Nicoletta, maybe you could also tell us maybe one thing that you own before you started your own winery.
Yeah, well, actually, now we started our project with a little bit of experience on our shoulders with my partner. The thing is really that you need to have a lot of patience. What we learned is that small steps really to grow and to have a lot of patience. So I think this was a very important lesson we learned during the years. And now we did and it's slow, gradual steps. Yeah, that's it. The philosophy now, after experience before.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta. Maybe we could move to Tracy Brand from Donkey and Goat.
Hi, I'm excited to be here. So this will be my 18th vintage for Donkey and Goat, where I co-founded after spending I co-founded in 2004 after spending 2002 in France, and then 2003 making wine in a garage in San Francisco. We would be into ghosts. Over the 17 years, we have leased and kind of managed the farming. I wouldn't go as far as to say we did it all of ourselves, but today we're working with a handful of growers like Jill Mathiasen and her husband, Steve, all in Northern California. We're, I guess today we're a little bit more spread out. We started out largely in El Dorado. Having come out of France in the Rhone Valley, we really focused on Rhone varietals for about 10 years. Sorry, the train in Berkeley is very loud and I'm outside at my winery, so it'll pass. So we were farming in El Dorado for about 50% of our production with a gentleman named, actually Chuck and Ron Mansfield. Chuck is the son, Ron is the father. And we then go over to Mendocino, where we are spread out a little bit. We have some vineyards. We worked for 3 years in the Anderson Valley, one around Hopland, one north of Ukiah, and in the Mendocino Ridge. And then we come down to Napa, where Jill and Steve are, and then we have a project in Sonoma as well. With the focus staying in the Rhone category more or less for the first 10 years. After that, we did start to branch out. So today, very much like what Jill said, we make a whole host of different varieties. So within the Rhone family, we are pretty broad. And then we also add in there Chardonnay from Linda Vista, Pinot Meunier from Russian River, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Merlot, Cab. So you get the picture. We definitely do a lot. Every year we're probably making somewhere around 28 different wines, and we distribute about a quarter of that, maybe more like a third. So a lot of these productions are quite small, somewhere south of 200 cases, and they just stay with our wine club and our tasting room. In total, we make about 7,000 cases. It really does bounce between about 55 and 7,500. Last year was quite difficult. We were down about 40%, so that's probably the smallest vintage we've made in a decade. We employ about 10 to 15 people, like Jill, between, or I guess I don't have the vineyard part, but between the hospitality crew, the seasonal workers, and the cellar, and then my office and marketing folks. And And actually, like Jill, I was going to say the very same answer as far as the one thing that that I wish I'd known was just how much additional work and effort every single day is beyond the making of wine. So the whole aspect of running a small business and running a small manufacturing business that operates all the way through to the end consumer, but also, you know, opens up for all the channels. Sorry. So we're selling to distribution, we're exporting, we're selling to restaurants occasionally, and then we're also selling to the consumer via our wine club and our tasting room and the internet. So it's definitely a very robust business. But what I also wrote down when Jill was talking to say something different and speaking from a woman's perspective, I wish in 2004 I had known that I could buy myself an electric assist pallet jack, which I purchased in 2016 and changed my entire ability in the cellar. I can now do everything I need to do by myself. So
What is it? Can you give us for people who don't work in the winery, what did you just buy?
in 2016, I bought an electric assist pallet jack. So in America, we tend to put barrels on racks and stack them. You know, in my cellar, we're 3 high, so that means 6 full barrels. And to move that around the cellar with a traditional, you know, muscle-operated pallet jack is quite difficult for someone my size once they're 3 high or 6 barrels. But with an electric assist, I can reconfigure my entire cellar all by myself, and I don't have to ask anyone for help.
Okay, so yeah, for the aspiring winemakers here, that's very essential. And let's go, last but not least, Brienne Day.
Hi, thanks for
Hi,
having me.
Brienne.
I'm kind of like annoyed at how nervous I am right now. I've been doing Zoom events like crazy, and for some reason I'm very nervous. I think I'm intimidated by being on a panel with these ladies. I have Day Wines in Oregon, and this will be my 10th year on my brand, and then I was data gathering so that because I always forget what I've done and what quantities and whatnot. But this will be my 17th harvest in production, and we will be making about 15,000 cases this year. I'm working with 30 vineyard sites from Oregon. I mean, the Oregon-Washington border, like the north part of the Willamette Valley, down to the south part of Oregon at the California border in the Applegate Valley. That's a considerable increase from where I have been in the past. And so we'll see how it goes. I'm in the middle of starting a new build out on my winery also for some extended outdoor production space. So I think that I'll have a little bit more space to continue to make more. I got involved in the wine industry in my early 20s-ish. I got very interested in it as a young person, and was also very interested in travel. And when I was 25, 26, I sold everything I owned and traveled around the world for a couple of years to wine producing regions, because I had this really insatiable thirst for knowledge about wine and just to see the world, and seeing the world through the lens of the wine industry was amazing and rewarding and awesome. And so I started actually learning how to make wine when I came home from that trip in 2008. And while I was traveling, wines that were grown using organic and biodynamic farming methods and using more minimalist styles of winemaking were the wines that really jumped out to me. So I was pretty set in a philosophy when I came home from that trip to look for people to work for that were using those kinds of philosophies. So that was always kind of my motivation and the way that I looked at it. And currently I'm working, like I mentioned, I'll be working with 30 vineyards this year. About, I would say 80% of those are organic or are farmed organically, and maybe less, maybe 75%. About 15% is biodynamic, And then there's a slice of people that are still considered sustainable, but I've asked that they not use glyphosate or other synthetic herbicides in the vineyard. And it's baby steps from there, helping some of my small growers get to a place where they feel comfortable farming organically has been kind of a goal of mine. I work with a lot of Pinot Noir. There's a lot of Pinot Noir in Oregon, and I make it in both kind of classic styles and atypical styles. I also work with Chardonnay in a very, very classic way. And then I work with a whole slew of other varieties in a lot of different styles and a lot of different, I don't know, versions. So I work from the south of Oregon. I work with Tannat, Cab Franc, Malbec, Vermentino. I've worked with Primitivo, Roussanne Marsanne, Grenache Blanc, Malvasia Bianca, Syrah, Viognier, and I'm really interested in seeing more Italian varieties in Southern Oregon. And so I have a couple of growers that have planted Zabibo and Nero d'Avola for me. And from the north part of the state, I work with Pinot Meunier, Pinot Blanc, Riesling, Müller-Thurgau, Gewürztraminer, Muscat, Syrah and Viognier, and I'll be working with Gamay, Aligote, and I think that's about all. I don't know. I'm sure I've forgotten a couple. And I have 2 full-time employees, and I hire interns around harvest, and we've hired some part-time front of house people to man our tasting room. I have a tasting room as well that we built on the property, and hopefully by next year I'll be able to have. I'm looking to have a couple more full-time employees as well. I do all of our bookkeeping and our compliance and all office work, and so I'd really like to hire an office manager because I'm so done with that.
And what's one thing that you wished you had known, I guess, when you started your own winery?
I thought about this question a lot, and I worked in a lot of different types of businesses prior to the wine industry. I did mortgages and I did project management for a design agency. And when I was learning how to make wine, I worked in distribution and front of house in restaurants and sold barrels and tried to really look at the industry from a lot of perspectives. And so I thought I had it really figured out when I started everything. But as we've been talking and as I've been listening to more stories from other women, and I'm sure we'll touch on this more later, I wish I had known what a boys club it was, because I probably wouldn't have tried so hard to like integrate. I would have been probably more comfortable with myself being an oddball outlier that didn't get invited to the cool kid boy club things, and I wouldn't have taken it so personally if I had realized, I think, that it was, you know, just the way it was and it didn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah, that's definitely a why a lot of us probably can relate to. Yeah, for sure. Thank you Anne, very much. So I want to start off with, you know, when we start a natural winery, what kind of start? So let's Tracy and Brianne talking about, you guys decide to start off as and buying grapes. So yeah, is it hard to organic biodynamic grapes in and then later, or if been in your 18th harvest, like has it, what pricing trends for the grapes? Like give us an idea about also when you guys you use a lot of Southern Rhode and just talked about a lot of the other to source these grapes. Give us an idea what it's like. To start with Tracy.
Sure. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay. So I wouldn't say that it's hard, certainly not any longer, to source and for us, I mean, I don't even typically use the word source, although I understand, but ours is really more an approach of finding somebody that we can, kind of partner with for decades, right? So like talking about, is it hard to find some of these obscure varietals? We've planted most of what we would probably qualify as obscure varietals because again, we've had a relationship with, in that case, the farmer since 2005. So it's not hard, I think, to find necessarily if you're going at an approach in that manner versus just going out to say, hey, I need to find some Merlot for 2021. It's May and I want it to be organic. Now that might be a little more difficult, right? Because people are in these longer term relationships where you might be able to get some extra fruit, which happens a lot. Like if I'm farming by a block and the block comes in heavy and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to take 6 tons of Gamay this year. Then Ron and Chuck might be like, oh, well, we have somebody who's been in line for 2 years. Can we sell them the rest of your block? And I'm like, of course. And so that aspect I think happens as well. So depending again on what conversations and relationships you've built, you might be able to more easily grab something in that kind of scenario. As far as what we pay, I mean, I tried to look at this. I think I didn't weight it for volume, so it's not really accurate. For example, like the Cabernet that we get from Steve and Jill, of course, is far more expensive than the pig pull coming out of El Dorado. And I get way more pig pull than Cabernet. But I just did a quick little average. And so our quick average on all of our costs in 2020, actually, no, in 2019, I did not do 2020 because it was such an anomaly. We're somewhere about $2,800 a ton on average. And again, we go up far higher than that. We don't go much lower than that. There's a few outliers for us, but largely if we're farming organically, we're looking easily at $2,200, $2,300 a ton. As far as trends in California, I mean, California, I'm looking at the grape crush report from 1996 to 220. And now these values are far lower than what I'm saying. For example, last year, the average was 675 a ton, which is obviously not anything any of us are working with. But interestingly, last year, or maybe not interesting given the year, pricing was down 17%. So I know Jill could probably speak more to this, but there were, many growers who had smoke impact fruit out there that were, maybe without insurance, or maybe the insurance policy wasn't such that it was going to make sense to pay off. And so there's a discount given for, the buyer to go ahead and give it a try and whatnot. Did I answer all of the question?
And what about you, Brianne? What has your experiences been? Tracy, it seems like, long-term relationships with growers are very important.
Yeah, for sure. I would consider myself definitely a negos. Like I am sourcing fruit from growers that are doing things the way I would want to do if it was my own vineyard. And for the most part, I don't have a lot of input into what they're doing because they're already set up and doing it in a good way. There are on the occasion, like I mentioned, where there have been some growers that I've been able to help steer away from using things like glyphosate in the vineyard and steer them towards being certified organic. And that has felt really awesome. I think there's probably I can think of 3 or 4 growers that's the case for. So I mean, yeah, I guess we are having a little bit of an impact in terms of what they're doing. But in terms of difficulty, it's very laborious. Writing contracts for 30 different vineyard sites takes a lot of time, especially when 15 of those are new for this year. So it's very labor intensive of finding the sites, visiting the sites, talking with the growers about what they're doing, trying to find wines that have been made from that site so you can kind of assess what the fruit is going to be like. And then in some cases, writing contracts for the first time. A lot of these growers that I'm working with are people who have been farming for a long time, several decades here in the Valley, and are very old school about how they've been doing things, and everything's been on a handshake. And so that's not how I like to do things, particularly with the challenges that we have of climate change, with fires that we've had, and with other issues that are just things that we don't know exactly how they're going to go. I'd rather talk about, in case a problem comes up, let's fall back on a contract. I like to have a really firm contract. So there's a lot of labor that goes into it, but in terms of actually finding these growers, I haven't had that hard of a time as long as I start early. And this year I started looking for new vineyards to work with in December of 2020. And it's going until now. I'm still writing some contracts right now. So as long as you get there early and get ahead of maybe other people who are growing, it is a more competitive kind of segment of the market, because there are so many producers that are doing it the way I am, with sourcing fruit and not owning vineyards. So, but it hasn't, as of yet, been difficult to actually find the vineyards to work with. I see you're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Can we move on to maybe so there was a finding grapes during difficult years.
No, I mean, like, if we're talking about like fire years and stuff, there were an abundance of grapes that people didn't want to work with. So I had no difficulty finding grapes at all. I mean, you had to accept that there was some level of risk involved, because there was probably going to be it could be a bit of a smoke problem. But if you're willing to take that risk on, then there was a surplus of fruit. And in recent years, there's been a lot of Pinot Noir available. If I want to work with Gamay, that's going to be more difficult. Or if I want to work with Aligote, that's more difficult, because there's only, a handful of vineyards that actually grow those varieties, and then a lot of people want to buy that fruit. But there's a lot of Pinot Noir planted, and there's a lot of Pinot Gris planted. So if that's the way you want to go, then there's a lot of fruit.
Yeah. And let's talk about, let's move on to Jill and Nicoletta. You guys actually own land. So can we talk a little bit about what's the situation with buying land in your respective regions? Is it easy to buy land? Are there banks available? Let's start with Nicoletta.
Yes. Well, actually here in Italy, where our project is based, and in all Europe, the thing is that you cannot plant vineyard if you don't get permissions, which are decided at the level of European Union, and then each country gets its quote assigned, and then each region gets its quotes assigned. So in our case, where we are in Tuscany, so we need to get authorization to plant a vineyard. And so, for example, in our case, our aim was to plant 1 hectare. So we have been asking for 3 years authorizations to get small plots to be able to reach 1 hectare. So this is something which makes it more complicated for the grower. Otherwise, you can just buy vineyard which is already planted. And then you automatically buy also the rights for planting in the moment in which you buy it. Or if you have your vineyards, you can explant something and replant. This is the other way you can deal with these low issues. So the agriculture land, it's to turn it into vineyard, you need to pass through all these procedures. So normally the thing is that you buy already planted vineyard, or if you want to plant it on your own, you need to get sure you get the rights, and it's not automatically that you get the quantity of hectares you desire to plant. In many cases, you get less than what you have required, and it takes some extra time to reach what your goal is. So yeah, that's the thing here. We keep our project very small, so our aim was to reach here one hectare, so that we are able to do it by ourselves without need to get extra working force. So it's just my partner and me, and actually it's most him because we also have a small baby, and I'm not really super active in the vineyard in this period. And yeah, so also we are doing a lot of experiments with natural growing techniques, and also for this reason we wanted to keep it small, so that we are free with our experiments. Another thing I just want to mention, that differently perhaps to the States, here in Tuscany you cannot plant whichever variety, so this is also something that is guided by law. Based on where you are, in what kind of appellation you are based, you can plant just the authorized varieties. So you can basically, these are like traditional varieties for the region, and some permitted international varieties which you can plant. So like if I want to plant, for example, a Sirtico, I cannot plant it. I'm not authorized.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes it's a little bit annoying, but it's a little bit conservative perhaps here in Europe on these things. Then the higher in the hierarchy of the appellation system, the area you are based, the more they are restricted.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Nicoletta. Jill, could you give us an idea about what it's like to buy land, and is it expensive in Napa?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's very expensive. I mean, buying, like what Nicoletta said, I mean, you have to have permits if you buy unplanted land to plant vineyards here. And it's also very restrictive. You can't, if you plant on a hillside at any kind of grade, you have to have a whole engineering plan and lots of permits, and that can take a long time. In our case, the first property that we purchased was where it had a home on it that we were moving to. The house was being sold as a tear down, and we renovated the house and lived in it, even though it was really pretty funky. And then the vineyard was pretty much kind of run down and needed a lot of care. So, our model is kind of like buying the diamonds in the rough, where you can get it for a much better price. And then we put our kind of sweat equity into rebuilding it and making it, a good producing vineyard and a livable house in the case of our home vineyard. And then the second vineyard that we bought, it's really was kind of a lucky thing, but it's kind of like being part of the community. I mean, if you were just going to go on the open market and try to buy a vineyard in Napa, through a realtor or something, I mean, you would be paying top prices of, I don't know, probably on average $500,000 to $600,000 an acre. Which is, pretty exorbitant and not something that we can afford. But we bought a property that had a winery on it, which is also really hard to come by, for a pretty good price for the same reason. The winery was really run down and basically just a shell of the building that we had to build out. And the vineyard, about 2/3 of the vines were dead and we had to replant. But it already was permitted for the vineyard and the winery. So that was worth a lot to us. And again, it was a diamond in the rough that we've just kind of been building out over time. And the way we found it was just really through our neighbor. We also lease vineyards. And so the Linda Vista vineyard that Tracy was talking about, where she gets some Chardonnay from, that's our neighbor's vineyard. It's right behind where I'm sitting right now. There's people that own the vineyard are retired and wanted to have vineyard around their house. And so we lease the vineyard from them and farm it ourselves. And we have a number of leases now with that same kind of setup. People have second homes or vineyards are retired, and they don't know anything about how to grow the grapes or what to do with them. And it turns out to be an opportunity for us. And a lot of these vineyards are kind of just glorified landscaping. So they're like 1 to 3 acres. The Linda Vista Vineyard's actually the biggest block that we farm. It's 14 acres. But, you know, there's a lot that is involved. Like we have total control on on growing the grapes, on everything about the vineyard part of it, but we're still in a relationship with the landowner. And those leases are really lucrative for us because they keep our, especially for being in Napa, they keep our grape prices down. But then, you know, the property can change hands, and then you're dealing with a new landowner. You have a relationship with the landowner. They live there at least part of the time. So you're always kind of negotiating around them, and hopefully, you know, so every one of those, we now have about 10 vineyards that we lease. Every single one of those is a separate relationship that we have to maintain. So there's a lot of work in that, but it's what's made it affordable for us to be able to farm in the Napa Valley.
Yeah. And let's talk about, now that we've, you know, talked about grape sources, like sales models, and that COVID has impacted your distributor sales to consumer in Italy.
Yeah, direct to consumer, it is very common here in Tuscany, also because the region has very well developed tourism. I think things here are a little bit less well organized than in the New York. I haven't been to Napa, but I've been to visit wineries like in Western Australia, and it's super well organized wine tourism. Here in Tuscany, for example, it's a little bit more complicated. There is not, you need like to call the winery and to organize your meeting normally by yourself. It's why, for example, in Western Australia, you just go in the bureau where they organize everything for you, and it was super well organized. But it's something which is very important for the wineries here. And the COVID impact, losing both the HoReCa field, the restaurants, and as well as the wine tourism was really a very, very hard times for many small wineries here in Tuscany. In our case, so like Terre del Vinci, which is actually my partner's project, in which I'm also helping. It's a biodynamic small winery here nearby, based near to our new project San Donato in Bellaria. So what we did is that we started an e-commerce, because before COVID, our business model was mainly to export, working with small importers specialized in natural wine. And when COVID started, they basically didn't retire their orders, because they were all waiting for better times, because they mostly rely on the HoReCa sector. So our sales dropped dramatically. And yeah, we actually started selling through alternative channels here locally. So like apps which work direct to consumer in the area here in Tuscany, and we did e-commerce, and this partly compensated the lost sales, but still we were not to the same levels we were before COVID, but at least this helped us to survive. For a small winery, this was steps gave us some breath. Yeah,
that's good to hear. And one thing that I know, for example, Jill, Brianne, and Tracy, you guys both have, all three of you have tasting rooms. So Tracy, could you tell us maybe just some quick things about what you need to think about if you have a tasting room, and any things to be aware of?
Yes. So we, like
a
donkey and goat in 2004. And it wasn't until we moved to the current location in 2011 that we opened a tasting room. And I sort of famously said, because I was a little weary of doing this. I maybe rightfully so assumed it would be a lot of work. And I was like, oh, we'll just, put out our shingle and cover the difference in rent. And of course, quickly realized that there was a huge amount of opportunity there, and it was a huge amount of work. And I think the best analogy would be, if you have a little farm and you go from, selling it at the veggie stand, and you decide that it'd be a good idea to open a restaurant. And, opening a tasting room, certainly the way that we operate it now, since COVID really changed everything we do, it is there are a lot of similarities. We don't have the complication of the food service in that manner. Our food is more picnic style, but it's still a lot of work. But it's a huge part of the success of our business. So it's not, it's extraordinarily valuable. I also quickly learned that I didn't want to do that. So we've always had someone, one of our staff doing it, which is, I think, a brilliant decision if you if you want to focus on other things.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, kind of because we are talking about natural wine, what are some unique challenges in operating natural? Brianne, I know. Sorry, let me just like, because because in natural wine we talk about using indigenous yeast and we don't want to inoculate. Maybe Brianne, you can tell us a little bit about, you have made wine, not always at day camp. So have you found and then eventually you started the day camp co-op, like what prompted you to do that, and whether you see challenges with more natural winemakers working together or not? Or maybe it's easier because no one's inoculating. That? Brianne?
Yes, here we are. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I feel like inoculations are such, they start the fermentation process. How you get the yeast into your fruit is a crucial step in winemaking, and it's a crucial decision-making process. But my attitude has always been that you can't isolate everything to be sterile to where you're like, I'm only going to have indigenous yeast in my fruit. That's impossible. They're microscopic. You'd have to completely sanitize every fermenter you've ever had, every barrel you've ever had. It would be impossible. So my attitude towards it has always been, as long as I'm not whacking it with a giant dose of one yeast strain, I'm probably going to be creating an environment where a lot of yeast are coexisting and hopefully creating a more diverse, complex wine. My attitude towards inoculations has always been based on creating a better wine. It hasn't been based on the dogma of being like, I need to be a natural winemaker, so I'm not going to use commercial yeast. And for my purposes, I have made wine in facilities where they use, inoculations. I've had tenants in my winery that use inoculations. So there's a high chance that the ambient yeast in my winery, there's different strains of commercial yeast that are a part of that. And I'm not worried about that. I'm fine with that, because I don't think that lab created yeast and yeast out in nature have that many different things common. I mean, I think they have a lot in common with each other. They're not different things, really. It's just isolating strains of yeast and using only one strain of yeast, and then using, certain strains of yeast to have an impact on the flavor of the wine intentionally. That's the kind of thing that I'm trying to steer away from. I haven't done a lot of Pied de Cuves. I've done like a couple, but it's not a regular thing that I do. But I know a lot of people that do that, and I've had several producers in my facility that do that. And if that works for
can you explain what pied de couve is to people?
Sure. It's when you create like a starter from the vineyard site that you are sourcing your fruit from, or where you have your vineyard, and get the actual yeast going directly in the vineyard to ensure that that's the thing that it's basically you're doing an inoculation with a starter that you start in the vineyard with, a more outside environment, so you're not getting the influences of commercial yeast products. So, for my attitude, particularly early on when things were out of my control more, because I was renting space in other people's facilities, but that was only for my first 2 years. First 3 years, I was in other people's facilities. And then I purchased the we're in 2015. And we had 11 producers in the building with me at that point. And I think 1 or 2 of them did inoculations, and the rest were native. And I don't know, I don't foresee it doing that much to my wines, particularly when we're creating the environments we want in our fermenters. I tend to seal off all of my fermenters until they really get going with fermentation, just to protect from oxygen. And so how much it's getting influenced by other people's, I don't know. I've never done I've never gotten the microscope out to figure it out, but that's how we do it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing with us your philosophy. And another aspect, I guess I want to ask Tracy, throughout your throughout your years, like, what was the journey in terms of making minimally wines with less intervention, with no fining, filtering, minimal sulfur? Did you start off with a gradual approach where you kind of did more sulfur than you would like once you knew your grape sources? Like, what was the journey like making more natural wine?
It was more of a roller coaster ride than starting at one point in a linear decline or anything, and various things in play. I mean, to touch on the pied de couve, we've always kind of had that philosophy that once, the first couple of ferments are the hardest to get going. And once we have a, active fermentation going for a couple of weeks in the cellar, if there's any, we cross-pollinate a lot. So, I've got some Grenache fermenting over in, that one. Now I just brought in some Syrah. I'm going to take a little of the Grenache that's already going and throw in the Syrah to get it going faster. And we do that because we've always tried really hard to keep the VA levels down, and without having, anything in those vats, that can be a challenge. At least it has been for us. So, getting the fermentation going like that. When we first started, we played around with cold soak because that's just what everybody in California did, and quickly realized that was a real clear recipe to have crazy high VA. And we didn't want the extraction. So we're like, what the hell are we doing? So with pied de couve, I was going to mention that, we very successfully, what I call kind of cross-contaminate once we've got active big fermentations going. Where we've struggled is the real idea of the pied de couve, where you are taking, we'll go out and pick for the very first vineyard, a couple 100 pounds and try to ferment in a small vessel. Again, it's the same problem. It often, it doesn't get going strong enough to not have higher levels of VA. And so that often is a struggle for us. With sulfur, we've never been, dogmatically anti-sulfur, but we've always been very use as needed and, kind of be measured in the approach. So, we don't just automatically start sulfuring the whole cellar the minute primary is done or malolactic's done. But if we think we need to, because the pH is too high that year or whatnot, we certainly will add a little. We save the pet nats and one Syrah. We do add sulfur in the blending to bottling process. It depends exactly on the wine as to what that means. But, what other things have we, I mean, we've played with so much over the years, and it's kind of ebbed and flowed. We haven't really ever cared about clarity, so there's not been a lot of focus on the filtration side of the house unless there was, or fining, unless there was a reason to. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's interesting. From the audience, can the term natural winery include that ferments majority, but not necessarily all native occurring yeast? There's anybody want to?
I'll let Brianna. I don't think there's a definition. I think that's one of the things with natural wine, right? We have pillars, we have charters, but I mean, I think there's definitely some ambiguity and some flexibility.
I agree with you, Tracy. Because natural wine doesn't have a definitive definition, at least in this country, that's been one of the issues that that I think exists in natural wine making or in the natural wine community, is that we're not all talking about the same thing with a clear set of principles that we have to ascribe to. So I think it's, for me personally, I've started to kind of steer away from exactly using that term, particularly when I'm out doing sales and when I'm talking with somms and buyers, and they might ask about like, oh, are you a natural winery? I will say, let me describe to you how I make the wine, and I'm going to let you decide if I'm a natural winemaker or not, because I'm going to do things that I think are best for my winery and the things that I think are best for my wines. And I think that you need to run the program that you think is best for your business. And if those two things line up, that's awesome. And I have never had anybody, once I've described to them how I make the wine and who I source the fruit from, they will always say, oh yeah, that's what natural wine is. And it's like, okay, well, good. I'm glad that we agree about something and that you can use my wine and stuff. But ultimately, it's up to the person who's selling the wine, I guess, to decide how they want to tell a consumer that it's been made, because, or what story where their principles are, because there isn't a consensus in this country about what it is exactly.
And I could give perhaps a European perspective on this question. As Terre del Vinci, our winery, we are part of Vinnatur, which is the association of natural winemakers. Yeah, and the status of the association actually states that only fermentation with natural yeast is admitted. So only spontaneous fermentation.
Right, with the new, yeah.
There is a question about
we're going to go into more in a little bit. Yeah, I definitely want to ask about viticulture shortly, but I just want to touch upon something interesting that talked about. There was a article on the wine in wine about mouse, and they were talking about how there is a confluence of different factors that contribute to mouse, such as the level of evolution of farming, less copper, sulfur, less intervention in winemaking, more carbonic maceration, shorter élevage, less tannins, and the effect of climate change, such as warmer temperatures, higher pH, and perhaps higher cellar temperatures. I was curious if Tracy, you had anything to say about that? And if you've seen a more instance of mouse?
Sorry, I was a little bit distracted. Something just came across me. Yeah, I definitely believe that there's a confluence of issues happening. I think the article was pretty spot on. I definitely agreed with a lot of what Martha had to say. I have seen pHs trending higher, which I think a lot of us have already commented on in our preparation for the panel. And I think pH trending upwards does have implications that were kind of delineated in that article with regard to, you know, malolactic happening concurrently with primary fermentation. I think there's definitely fashion and trends that are also driving it. I think Martha talked about, you know, the carbonic, you know, trend is probably amplifying some issues, as well as just more and more people experimenting with this style of winemaking and not using sulfur and those sort of things. And then for us, there was something else touched on that it's also a little bit difficult to deal with because it is this thing that comes and goes. And I think I mentioned to you, have a lot back from 2018 that we had kind of set aside because it had mouse. And here, I guess about December and January, it's completely fine. I mean, we're selling it off in our keg program because then at this point, it's just not what we would normally do with it, but it's gone. So.
Mm-hmm. And Brianne, you had also mentioned that for you, the mouse issue was more linked to vineyard site. About that?
Yeah, it's a curiosity. My perspective is shorter than Tracy's or Jill's, and so, you know, I've been making wines in a warmer environment ever since I really started the brand. Like, I started producing wine in 2012, and in those vintages, 2012, 2014, 15, 16, 18, and 20 were all pretty warm years. So from my perspective, it hasn't had as much to do with trending pHs, but my perspective is shorter. So if I had been a winery that had started in the 80s in Oregon, I might be saying something different right now, but I'm a winery that started in 2012. So my pHs since 2012 have been pretty steady, and in 2020 were amazing. Our pHs were incredible. If it hadn't been for the smoke, I think 2020 could have been one of the best years that Oregon had experienced in a long time. And also my experience when I say vineyard sites, because when I started the brand, I worked with one site, and then I worked with two, and then I started adding on a bunch of different vineyard sites. And it wasn't until 2017 when I sourced some fruit from a particular vineyard, which was an organic vineyard, a certified organic vineyard, that I had some crazy issues happen with that particular site. And it was in a couple of different varieties of fruit. And it wasn't just me that had the issues, because I talked to other people that also purchased from the site, who were kind of colleagues of mine, and was like, did you have, you know, it was a whole slew of things. There was, you know, crazy VA, there was crazy mouse problems, and the pH in the fruit was 3.0. I mean, it really didn't make sense with what I was seeing. So from what I've seen, I have seen it tied to specific vineyard sites, and it hasn't seemed like it was choosy about being more aggressive in higher pH wines, because the wines that we were making were very low in pH. So I have more questions than answers about mouse personally. And it's something I hate. Like what Tracy said, sometimes it'll feel like something's heading in that direction, or you might get a hint of it, and then it magically resolves itself, and you're like, I have no freaking idea what just happened. So yeah, I don't feel like I have any concrete answers, but I also don't feel that it's as neat and tidy with an answer as some of the things that I've read, because those things have kind of gone against what I've seen. But I think it bears more research.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so there are some questions about viticulture. So I want to ask Jill, I know you and Steve talk about this, like what are you thinking in terms of long-term impacts of wine both, you know, in the winery or in the vineyard, which is a big problem?
You know, a lot of people are talking about rootstocks that use less water, you know, budwood varieties that are more drought resistant. Certainly that's a great direction to be going, but it's more sustainable to keep a vineyard already that's planted than to replant a new vineyard. And, you know, so we already have the vineyards planted. So anything new that we're planting, we're definitely planting on more resistant rootstock. I mean, more drought resistant rootstock, using trellising that's where there's more shading, because we have a lot of sun exposure here, and we put shade cloth out a lot on our fruit to keep it from getting sunburned. So with new trellising, with the ability for the one row to shade the other, we've avoided having to put as much shade cloth out. But it's a real and ongoing issue. I mean, this year was, you know, we had very little rain and the vines are just not vigorous at all. We're going to have a much smaller crop this year because of the drought. You know, we water minimally. In the winery, we are regulated on how much water we can actually use in the winery as part of our permit. And so we're looking into a lot of recycling the water to use in, we can't recycle it for domestic use, but we could recycle the winery water for using it to irrigate the vineyard. So, you know, it's clearly a very big issue, and it's becoming bigger and bigger all the time here. And we're always just trying to be creative with solutions.
Okay. And we have another question asking about how you manage controlling and visiting different vineyards. Like, what is your approach to finding with how they're farming? I guess this question is for anyone, you know, who's
I'll answer that. I think it's vineyard visits are pretty clutch. Like spending as much time in those vineyards, particularly when developing a new relationship with somebody, is key. And the growers don't necessarily know that I don't necessarily go into it saying, hey, I'm only working with vineyards that do X, Y, and Z. I say, I'm interested in working with this variety of fruit. Let's talk about it. And showing up at the vineyard site, and farmers are proud of what they do, regardless of if I agree with them or not. So if they're using really conventional methods because they think that's how they're going to be growing fruit the best, they're going to tell me about it. They're not going to hide it from me. They're going to be like, we do some Roundup in the fall, in the spring before, you know, leaves come out and blah, blah, blah. Then I just let them talk and they'll tell you. And if you can see things in the vineyard that would run against if somebody said, oh yeah, we're totally organic, and they've got, you know, strips of dead grass underneath their vines. You're like, that's not organic. I can see it right there. I mean, there are a lot of things you can tell just by being at a site. You can tell what's planted in the cover crop and how healthy that looks, and, you know, what other vegetation is around. And for the most part, the farmers are going to just give you straight up because they think that what they're doing is the best. And that's how it, you know, they're not trying to hide anything. It doesn't appear. Oh, but additionally, there are clauses in all of my contracts also that if we are agreeing upon things, we have clauses in the contract. So it's not a matter of trust. I'm too old to like put trust on anything at this point. I'm going to put it in a contract, and you know, if it's organic standards or whatever, we're going to call out by specific things what that means, and they're legally bound to doing things that way if that's what we've agreed upon.
Yeah, Tracy, you had mentioned some that you include in your contracts too about pH. I've never heard that. Can you share that?
Yeah, I was making mention that in our early days when we were getting started, and for us, contracts are often just to like Brianna said, I guess help the memory as far as what is the price and what are we ultimately going for when it comes to the ripeness level of the fruit. And we would often, I think standard operating procedure in California is for those contracts to specify ripeness in terms of the bricks or the sugar. And for us, we always really think more in terms of acidity and flavor and other aspects of the plant and the fruit. But our bricks can vary relatively dramatically based on those other things, vintage to vintage. And so the acidity at picking for us is more important, honestly, than the bricks, because of how important a acid profile is to the soundness of the wine at the end.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talking about more about sustainability issues with owning and operating a winery. And we know that, the carbon footprint of a winery, the biggest contributor is the glass bottle and also transport. So for example, if we look at studies in California, there has been one that talks about like transporting glass packaging is 68% of a winery's carbon footprint, perhaps transport contributing more so because they have to, Australia is far from some of the places they have to ship to. Another study that I found from the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance states that, 30% comes from the glass bottle. So I just want to talk about, have you guys thought about glass bottles in any way? There are still heavy bottles or non-recycled bottles. Do you think we'll ever be able to move away from the glass bottle? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Maybe Nicola?
I'm glad to start speaking about this question because this is absolutely hugely important aspect. So there is no real sustainability if we don't consider the carbon footprint, and glass. It actually is about, I found data of 80% of the carbon footprint of a bottle of wine, 18%, which is actually the highest percentage of a single aspect comes from the glass. And if we consider that in the world are each year produced 14 billion of bottles, majority of which are bottles in glass, putting this on scale, in perspective, this makes a huge impact. So the wine industry as a whole is really looking for solutions and to find a way to tackle this, because this is a huge issue. Although if you put it in comparison to other industries, wine industry as a whole is not that huge, the impact in terms of carbon footprint, but it's still a considerable impact. So there are a lot of research in these fields as well. So techniques for carbon, for sequestration of the CO2 during fermentation. And I think passing to lighter bottles is really the minimum that should be done, but this is actually not enough. So here in San Donato in Bellaria, we still don't, we are expecting our first harvest, but really we're thinking of what can be actually, in our case, a solution. So we are thinking of reusable bottles and perhaps focusing on local sales and incentivizing a circular economy, so returning your bottle and get a discount. So but we still haven't come out with a definitive solution. I think it's not easy to find solution to this question, but it is super important. And passing to lighter bottles, it's really the minimum, but this is not enough. More should be done. Recycled glass and really evaluating alternative packages. So it's a super important issue for the wine industry as a whole, for us as natural winemakers, but really for everyone, for all the players of the industry. This is hugely important. I don't know if you want to tell your thoughts on this regard.
I don't think Icy's on here right now, Nicoletta. She looks like she's disappeared, and she seemed like she was having some connectivity problems. So maybe we might have to talk amongst ourselves for a minute about this. I agree with you on what you're saying about that. And something that I'd like to maybe put out there as an idea for the people who are watching to also think about is that it's something that we all have to kind of care about and get behind, and not just put the focus on the wineries to necessarily come up with the solutions for that, because it's difficult for all of us, for people operating these small businesses. We're running on fairly thin margins, and I've tried to source American-made glass because then it doesn't travel as far. My options in terms of what's available to me that's made in America are greatly limited compared to what we can import from overseas, and the prices are a lot higher for American-made glass. Although some of the tariffs that we've been dealing with kind of have sort of leveled that out a little bit, but regardless, it's making the per bottle price go up pretty significantly. And on the other side of it, I hear a lot of pushback about why are natural wines so expensive? Why is an American wine cost this when I can get, a really well-made French wine for $7 a bottle or whatever it is? And just to think about the fact that all of those things about land prices, glass prices, organic farming, all of those things are raising the price of every single bottle along the way. And it can't just be on the winery to absorb that, because we wouldn't have sustainable businesses. We can't sustain that. It has to kind of be an awareness throughout the industry that if the winery's using American source glass, if they're an American winery, and if they're doing these things, their wine is probably going to end up costing a couple bucks more per bottle in order to make up for it, and accepting that and being supportive of it, and helping us to get to that place. That's my perspective on it.
Great.
But I don't
Tracy
know.
and Jill, what are your thoughts on these issues? Looks like you are muted.
Tracy and Jill, do you guys have any input on this?
I don't really have anything more to add, I guess, to what we lost Tracy to what Brianne said. I think we're doing everything we can to use the lightest glass possible, to source from locally, to source from American-made glass, to source glass that has recycled content. But this year was really challenging. We just did a really big bottling. We bottled, and it was really challenging even just to get glass this year, because of all of the people who normally buy imported glass, and all of the supply chain is broken because of all the transport being so difficult because of COVID, that a lot of the bigger wineries that typically buy imported glass were then buying American glass, which made it more competitive to get the American-made glass. And so it was really, really hard for us even just to get glass at all this year. And we have some friends who have smaller wineries and who haven't bottled yet, who can't find even source glass at all. So there's, just the supply chain issues. And that's just a this year thing, I'm hoping. But it's hard even just to we want to do the right thing and get the recycled content glass, but we were just happy to get glass this year, so we couldn't be as particular. One of the things I think that IC brought up is Also, the colored glass has more recycled content than the clear glass, and a lot of natural wines are bottled in clear glass. I think that's just part of the package. The look of the package is to bottle it in clear glass. If you see an Instagram site for any like natural wine shop, and you see all the packages, they're all in clear glass, and it's much harder to have a lot of recycled content in a clear glass than in a colored glass. So if natural wine consumers care about all the different aspects about it, it's something that we've been kind of trained to be like natural wine. It comes in clear glass, but I think we need to get away from that because there's clearly advantage to colored glass.
We are also considering the idea of 1 liter bottles because it's more sustainable in terms of volume. But moving away from the glass, at least here in Italy, it's not that easy because it's a little bit more conservative, the market. So people are used to drink in glass bottles. I think you get perhaps an advantage in this in the US because people are more open also to alternative packages as canned wines and stuff like this, which here in Italy is still very unpopular. There is no trend about canned wine. And actually, cans are much more sustainable compared to glass bottle. But are useful for wines not meant, of course, for long aging, for easy drinking, everyday wines, for the glue styles could be perhaps an interesting solution. Well,
hold on. I just want to say I want to apologize for some of the noise that's happening, that's going on, and it seems like Icy is in Taipei, so are the connections shaky? I'm not sure if it's because of the geographical distance, but we're trying to get her back. In the meantime, though, if you can see the Q&A and you want to just answer, can you see the Q&A on your screens?
Yeah, I see the Q&A. Beyond physical materials, how do you incorporate sustainability?
Super. So if you want to read out and answer the questions as you go, that'd be great. And so panel has another 10 minutes or so. So I'll just, if I see can't make it back, then I'll just come back in and when we're all at that.
Okay.
Oh. Brianne, do you want to get that one?
I guess so. I mean, the physical materials are a big part of sustainability, but there's also the human aspect of sustainability that is hugely important. And for me, thinking about all the people who are involved with making the wine and wanting it to be sustainable in terms of benefiting their lives also has been something that I've thought a lot about. Everywhere from like trying to increase production so that I have more resources so that I can set up an employee healthcare plan. That's really, really important to me. And it's one reason that I'm increasing production so significantly this year is so that I just have the ability to continue to pay my employees more competitive wages and set up an employee healthcare plan. And also in terms of thinking about everybody who has something to do with producing my wine, down to, immigrant laborers, or not down to, but like really thinking about these people, because in Oregon, such a large percentage of what happens in the vineyards and picking is done by immigrant laboring crews. And I feel like there's been, in this, particularly this past year in Oregon, there were so many things that were against everybody. But you think about from the perspective of if you're a person who's earning their living by picking fruit and having to do, by the pound or by the bucket, however it is that they're paid, they're going to be out there working in the smoke regardless of regardless of their own health, because they have to, because they need to send money home to somebody, or that's why they're here, because that's where their living comes from. And thinking about what we can do to help protect people that are in a more vulnerable position because of those things. So I made it an aim to try to make sure that all of my growers had enough N95 masks for all of their crews during the smoke. I partnered with a healthcare provider in Southern Oregon called the Asante Foundation, and they sent up N95 masks to me. So it was very simple. I just had to give them to my growers, and they distributed them to their crews. Additionally, I didn't ask for anything to be picked while the smoke was happening, because I didn't want anybody out there in that. And I kept all of my contracts and bought all of the fruit that I said I was going to buy. And doing so ensured that my growers could pay those pickers also, so that there is a more sustainability when not just about how we're impacting the planet, but how we're impacting individual human, lives. And I think COVID and the fires have had a big impact on me as an employer to think about how these things affect the lives of my employees, but also thinking about the lives of everybody involved with making the wine. And I don't know, somebody else can read.
Hold on. I actually, yeah. So I've been in touch with Icy. She can't get back in. So she said that one thing that she know that all of you wanted to discuss, so it's less of a question, is well, there are two things. One is hiring more Black, Indigenous, people of color, and Asian American, Pacific Islanders too. And if you could just speak a little about what you've done, about why this is important to you, and what you're doing.
I think she wanted me to talk about that because we started a little internship, kind of informal internship program to help women in particular, but and then the BIPOC community and others to find a pathway in the wine industry, because I think it got revealed, to us specifically, through the last year, that our industry is so particularly white and not maybe hospitable to people of color, and that's really a sad thing to realize. And we felt like, there's a lot of we can just do what we can too at our little business. So this year we created a internship program. We have 3 women working with us, and some of them are women of color, and they are helping in the vineyard. So it's started at the beginning of the vineyard season, and they're working half-time in the vineyard, half-time in hospitality, and then they'll go to working full-time in the cellar this year. And we're trying to do a lot of education through that too. Every week we will, spend, a certain amount of time, an extended amount of time, explaining what we're doing in the vineyard, why we're doing it. So there's a little bit of school and education. I want to also be able to kind of explain to them a little bit more about my side, sales, marketing, and running the business of what I do. And I'm just trying to figure out, the vineyard is so easy to explain in a way, because you're standing there, you can see the vines grow, you can explain it. What I do is so much, I'm trying to figure out a more presentable way to, talk about some of the stuff that I'm doing, and then they'll get the hands-on experience in the cellar. And so there's a lot of mentoring that goes on with that, and not just kind of hands-on, here's how you do it, but kind of bigger picture stuff of, just kind of what the expectations are of people in the industry, how we, and then also helping people. We won't be able to hire these people when we're finished, but help these people, you know, through our connections in the industry, find other opportunities. So that's something we're excited about doing. And then I think the other thing that IC wanted us to talk about, that we talked about as a group, was being a working mom.
Yeah.
You know, it was really something that, you know, I worked in the nonprofit world for many years before we started in the wine business, but I've always been a working mom. At our last call, Brianne and Nicoletta were had their kids in the picture with them, which I love seeing. You know, it's a family business, and the kids are just around all the time, and you know, it's always been a challenge and always been a balancing act. You know, I think I'm a better parent, a better mom, because I work. And so, you know, having that sort of perspective of having to just figure out, you know, how to make it all work. But there's been so many challenges too. I mean, the first time that when I really started going on sales trips, the first time I went on a sales trip, you know, I'm going to meet with a buyer, and I get a call from my husband, and he's like, supposed to take the kids to school. And his question is, what time does school start? You know, like there was just no even like knowledge of like how to do it. And then there's always some big catastrophe that happened, you know, the first several times that I would go, and I'd be like texting the kids, or somebody who was supposed to give them a ride that forgot to pick them up, or, you know, something that happened every time I was gone. And I'd be about to go in to meet with a buyer. I'd be in a meeting and I'd get some, you know, text. So it's never like you could just go and travel and sell wine and be disconnected from what was going back at home. There was always this kind of like, you know, you always had to still be figuring out your job as a mom, even when you were traveling, doing sales. Now that's finished for me because my kids have grown, and but one is still in college. And as we were doing this presentation this morning, I got a text from him that he's been living in Hawaii during COVID because he took a year off from school, and he was in a surfing accident, and he got a concussion and has a fracture in his eye. And now, as soon as we're off this call, I'm going to need to figure out what to do. So it never ends. To you moms who have young kids, even when they're gone or you think they're gone, it never ends. And you're always a mom, and that's just part of the deal, I guess.
Wow, Jill. Yeah. Well, I'm really sorry to hear that. I know we're going over a few minutes, and I just want to give everyone else on the panel a chance to respond to what it's, you know, like working in making wine and also being a mom, because I know all of you have kids. But yeah, my best to you and Steve. You know, just if you need to hop off early, that's fine.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. So anyone else want to weigh in?
Yes, okay. Shall I go? Okay. Yeah. Also, as Jill said, it is indeed a challenging thing to be a mom and to run a small family business. I'm also a mom of two, of a baby and of a toddler. But I think we have this luxury of being our own bosses. So this permits us to manage our own time. So you have more tasks to manage, but if you manage to do it in a more creative way, this permits you to balance. It's not an easy thing to achieve, but it's possible. And I think we have this luxury really of managing our own time. And I think it's really important to keep on working and to be a working mom, because you are a model for your kids, and you show them that when you want something, there is a way to achieve it. There is a way of to find balance. So I think it's really important to give them this example to our kids. Yeah. And okay, Brianna, I give the word to you.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I started the winery before I had a kid. And I had my son in 2017, and I've been doing it on my own. My son's father really wasn't involved in my pregnancy, or he's very marginally involved in my son's life at this point. And maybe because I'm a single mom, I don't know, but he and I we're really, really, really tight. And I haven't wanted to give up any aspect of having him with me or mothering in any way. And so he has been with me. He comes with me to the winery. I don't use any childcare, so he comes with me to the winery. If I'm in the vineyards, he comes with me. If I go on a sales trip, he comes with me. And that's been really hard. That's the hardest part, to have a baby and a toddler out on the road. Fortunately, I've become really close with my backers, and one of the wife of the couple has become like his grandmother. So she has traveled with us quite a lot on my sales trips and helps out in that way. And he'll be 4 this August, and I'm going to be hopefully getting him into preschool for the first time in time for harvest this year, which I think would be wonderful. I think it's time for him to have a little independence from me, and for me to have a little bit of undivided attention as well, because it's gotten harder as he's become a toddler than it was when he was a baby. But I will say that I think being a mom has made me a better employer. And I think who I was before I had him, I have a tendency to work myself really hard and kind of ignore my own needs and forget to eat and forget to drink and forget to sleep and all those things, and have the same expectations of my employees. And when I had my son, those demands all became very immediate and present, and taking a break to nurse my kid and to feed myself was crucial because his life depended on it. I couldn't do the same kind of things that I used to do. And I noticed it a lot during COVID and the fires, that because he's with me all the time, I had to create environments that were healthy for him. And it made me really look at my employees and be like, well, if I'm expecting the environment to be this way because I want my son to be healthy, I should have the same expectations and provide the same environment for my employees. And I feel like it's made me a more, I think it's made me a more empathetic and understanding employer to be a mom than I was before. That possibly before I could have been more dogmatic and so driven by the vision of what the winery is, to be not as understanding. And I think that it's making me a better employer.
Right. Yeah. So thank you. Tracy, it seems like we've lost Tracy again. And I think is everybody muted? Okay, because there is a little bit of feedback. Anyway, I know it's much better now. So we are actually over time. I know there have been a lot of really great questions, and some people have questions that we haven't had a chance to answer. If you would like to email them to winefaresf@gmail.com. That's winefaresf@gmail.com. We'll try to pass them on to all the panelists, and so you can get some answers to your questions. This has been a really great discussion. It's the first one in Wine Fair, and I've got to say, we've had some glitches, but I think it went pretty well. I actually think it went really well, and I think all of you did a great job. You have so much knowledge and so much to say about this and other aspects of the industry. So it's been extremely interesting, and hopefully it has been for everybody else watching. So I want to thank Nicoletta. And by the way, I saw you're drinking from the bottle. What are you drinking there?
It's just water because I'm breastfeeding, unfortunately. Oh. So no wine for a month.
Well, I know it's nighttime for you. It's not like, for us where it's still before 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I thought maybe you were just having yourself a drink. And anyway, thanks for staying up so late, Nicolette. Thank you to Jill Klein-Mathisen. Thank you, Brianne. And also thank you to Tracy Brandt and to IC Lou, the moderator. And again, a big thank you to this panel sponsor, to Shepherd's Wines.